essentially we're going to be listening to Spock, Captain Spock, who does a very good YouTube channel, and how he and Rob Burnett came to a disagreement. Rob essentially went down the path of saying, well, is it okay to film false flashbacks? And he answered, yes, Tarantino did it. The great Tarantino in the Reservoir Dogs. And Captain Spock basically corrected him and said, no, that's not what happened in Reservoir Dogs. Tarantino was doing something else. I know why you think he did that, but Tarantino did not, in fact, do that. Now, when it comes to me, I'm sort of stuck in the middle because I don't think there are facts in a capital F sense in cinema because there just aren't rules in cinema. It's not physics. So we have to deal with a much more ambiguous terrain. But I agree with Spock. Rob got it wrong, and he was correct. So we're going to set it up in this way that Rob, because he has this section called Whining About Movies, where they just discuss open-mindedly various issues or within a film. And I can understand his perspective because he is a director. He's already produced and directed a few projects. He thinks he knows everything about certain topics. I understand that. And Spock, I think in a friendly manner, just said, no, you got it wrong. I understand why you think this, but Tarantino is simply not doing what you say he's doing. So we're going to hear Spock relate the anecdote. Well, as we
Unreliable narrator and the use of the cinematic flashback. And to sum things up, I like the trope of the unreliable narrator, someone that's not telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But the camera never lies, and so if you have a flashback, then it's as real as anything happening in the film. So if it turns out a character is lying, then I think it's very disingenuous or ignorant to cinematically film their lies. And I was actually talking about Ruin Johnson and The Last Jedi, and also The Usual Suspects, where 3/4 of the whole film, it just never happened. It was a fib told by Kobayashi or Kaiser Soze. Kaiser's that guy, Kevin Spacey, you know, the cup and if you made it all up, then what were they filming? There's nothing to film. So in the Twitter about 6 to 9 months ago, Rob said, oh, but what about Reservoir Dogs? That has a fake dream sequence, fibbed flashback from an unreliable narrator. And I was keen to point out, no, that was an unreliable narrator with a genuinely filmed, genuine flashback, although within that, the character that the actor was playing was acting out a fake anecdote from a genuine criminal, so he could act as a criminal and not the cop that he was, or was acting as, depending on how you view jobs and psychology. That's yet another layer that you can go to. So it's actually a work of genius, really, because in fact, I think it's actually a trope to spare, because Tarantino could have actually could have cut down that anecdote to its essence of just the Tim Roth being in the toilet, and had that before the reveal, and still implied that he was actually a criminal as he claimed before the reveal that he was a cop. So that's actually
you can see this topic is way bigger than Tarantino because it involves The Last Jedi, The Usual Suspects, and other films that, again, use the unreliable narrator technique, but in different ways. I do agree basically with Spock that The Usual Suspects is mostly a lie. That when we hear Verbal speak to us, who it turns out is Kaiser Soze, or we think it's Kaiser Soze, most of the film never happened. We don't know what happened because the person can't be trusted. So when they're giving us the events, we can't say they happened. We can't say they did happen. We just don't know. But that Tarantino is not doing that in Reservoir Dogs. The character in question, what they're doing, now we can ask the question, how they're doing this, like in terms of cinema, like how is it we have access to their memories or consciousness? But once we make that big leap, what we're doing is we're seeing the character faithfully represent events to us because it's revealed they're undercover. They're merely training themselves as a criminal to pass themselves off as a criminal in the main story. But the flashback, as far as we understand it, is all true. It all did happen. There is, technically speaking, no unreliable narration in Reservoir Dogs. The person is misrepresenting themselves to the gang, but the narration is not misrepresenting events to us. The flashback did happen. It's true that it happened, and presumably we can believe everything that happened in the flashback. But Rob thinks two things. One, it's quote, a flashback memory, technically no. It really seems to be the camera's just like a documentary. It's just picking up the events. How it does this, that is a deep question. This is a deep question of all cinema, how events are recorded by a camera. Because we know it's a camera, because cameras can only move a certain way, they can only follow things a certain way. So yeah, why exactly a memory is structured like a film? Don't know, but it is. And secondly, that it's false, right? Because the character is lying. Well, I understand what the person is trying to say. Like Rob is trying to say, well, the character passed himself off as somebody different in the gang, right? Right, Reservoir Dogs is about a gang pulling off the heist, but one of the characters is not really a criminal. That's true, the character is lying to other characters, but that does not affect the narrative structure of the film. That's a separate thing. So if you're saying the film is lying to us, that's one thing. That's the usual suspects. But a character lying to us doesn't really matter because that's not affecting the narrative structure. What he was saying is that when we see that flashback, no, the film is lying to us. But as Spock rightly points out, and eventually Rob agreed, right? It's a happy ending, and even Tarantino apparently confirmed, yeah, that's all real. That's not a false flashback. That is all real. You should take it as a documentary. Now, I would disagree with Spock, I think, in terms of how he's defining unreliable narration. He's defining it at the character level. I think unreliable narration would presumably be the narrative structure of the whole film. But again, that's the thing. This is ambiguous because with The Last Jedi, we do see characters who seem to be unreliable narrators. But again, does it affect the whole narrative structure? It's a difficult topic, and I'm not also sure with him when he says Tarantino doesn't do it. Well, he didn't do it in Reservoir Dogs. I think we'll agree there, but does he not use unreliable narration? I think that's a more open question. But it's an interesting way that films can make us clash and fans can clash over it. But, you want to be careful when you're making claims to knowledge. I make claims to knowledge because I am a film historian and I've published a lot on this topic. So when I say something, I do it with a lot of research. But even if you do, you have to be careful and you think it's definitive because new information always comes in. You have to be ready to revise yourself. And thankfully, Rob was open-minded about it. But you could tell he was very dogmatic at the beginning. And he thought for sure, this is what Tarantino does. I'm a director. He's a director. We know how film works. You people are just amateurs. You don't want to come in with that attitude. Film is not physics. Film is not chemistry. You have to be open and available to other viewpoints and other perspectives and new information. Otherwise, you're not going to understand what's happening. You're just not. So a very happy ending. But yeah, just because a director tells you something or a quote film professional, don't believe it. We have to go with what's the best interpretation on the available evidence. And again, what is evidence and what is interpretation is itself up for grabs. So you got to be ready to have a continuing dialogue. Don't be careful about definitive statements because you have to always pose it as a question mark because you just don't know for sure. So please subscribe to Spock. He's a really good guy and he has very interesting topics he discusses. It's a little spicy. It's very kind of adult rated, so I just forewarn that. And Rob is a good guy. He does really good things with observations, but he does sometimes get a little dogmatic when discussing topics. All right, this has been a look at film culture on entering Tarantino land in a disagreement over the issue of unreliable narration. Thank you for listening.